Dismantling Obama's legacy. Donald Trump withdraws from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He says trade deals harm the U.S. But does he risk isolating his country, and who stands to gain from his decision? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rochelle Carey. U.S. President Donald Trump has been in office for less than a week, but he's already working towards fulfilling his campaign promises. He signed several executive orders in the first few days on the job, many of them undoing laws and deals that were put in place by former President Barack Obama. On Monday, Trump signed an executive order withdrawing the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So that's a trade deal the Obama administration had worked on for several years. It calls for lower taxes on trade between member countries. Obama had said this would give the U.S. an economic advantage over China, which was not part of the agreement. But Trump insists withdrawal from the deal is a great thing for American workers.
We want to start making our products again. We don't want to bring them in, we want to make them here. And that doesn't mean we don't trade, because we do trade. But we want to make our products here.
The Trans-Pacific deal was meant to include 12 countries on both sides of the Pacific Ocean. So here is some of what other leaders' reaction is to Trump's decision to withdraw.
We believe that President Trump is aware of the importance of a free and fair trade. We will continue to calmly seek his understanding for TPP's strategic importance.
It is possible that U.S. policy could change over time on this, as it has done on other trade deals. There is also the opportunity for the TPP to proceed without the United States, and I've had active discussions with other leaders as recently as last night.
So let's take a closer look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The 12 member countries, including the U.S., account for 40% of the global economy. So if implemented, it would become the biggest trade deal in history. Former President Barack Obama has said the deal would increase trade and create 650,000 jobs in the U.S., and several prominent Republicans supported TPP as well. But critics, including President Trump, say the deal would actually kill jobs because it encourages companies to outsource. And others say it gives big businesses too much power over public policy. All right, let's bring in our guests now in Washington. Melinda St. Louis, International Campaigns Director for Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. In Singapore, Debra Elms, Executive Director of the Asian Trade Center. And joining us on Skype from New Jersey, Chang, Foreign Policy Analyst and author of the book, The Coming Collapse of China. Welcome to all of you. And I'm going to start with the same question to all of you. Is this the right move for the United States to pull out of TPP? I will start with my first guest, Melinda.
Formally withdrawing from the TPP is a good thing for the United States. It is burying the corpse of a deal that was really already dead because of lack of support in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. public, and also the lack of support around the world in other TPP countries. We've been working for years with civil society groups from around all of the TPP countries who have been rejecting the corporate model of the TPP. And so the TPP being dead is a good thing, but the big question is, what's next? Will we have a new trade policy that puts people and the planet first instead of big multinational corporations? Okay,
and we will dive into that question in just a moment. That's a great question. Debra, do you think this was the right move?
Well, no, I don't think it's the right move. I particularly don't think it's the right move for the United States, although I'm less worried from the perspective of the U.S. I'm especially worried about what it means for those of us who sit out here in Asia, and viewed from Asia, it's a tragedy, frankly, from the United States perspective, but for those of us in Asia, I hope that the TPP continues without the United States, because we need to have open markets. These are export-dependent economies, and if the U.S. decides to sit this one out, then I hope that the rest of us continue to pick up the ball and carry it forward, because trade brings jobs, it brings growth, it brings development across this region, and that's what we need to have continue.
Gordon?
I don't think this is a good thing from the perspective of the United States, especially from U.S. leadership in the region. For the U.S. economy, it's probably a marginally good thing, Got to remember, though, that what makes TPP important is the allure of the U.S. market. And without that, TPP is really not going to go very far because China right now can't take up that mantle. Last year, Chinese imports fell 5.5%. The year before that, 2015, Chinese two-way trade fell 8.0%. So this is really going to be a problem for the region. And I think the U.S. is going to have to put together bilateral deals to replace TPP.
So that can mean negotiating individually with all these countries, and that could take quite a bit of time, and actually we'll come back to that in a moment. But Senator John McCain, senator from Arizona, this is what he said about the decision. He says it's a serious mistake, that it will hurt America. He says it will send a troubling signal of American disengagement in the Asia-Pacific region at a time that we can least afford it. Gordon, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I certainly agree with that because TPP, from my perspective, was not really a trade deal. It was really an issue of leadership in the region, that the United States was going to tie the economies around the Pacific to the United States. And this is at a time when China is trying to expand its borders, sometimes through the use of force, and that is destabilizing East Asia and South Asia. And that's important because right now you have a region in flux, and the U.S. does, and the region does need some U.S. stability to put things back right where they were before.
Debra, do you agree with that?
Well, I'd like to know who is going to sign a bilateral trade agreement with the United States, particularly given Trump's view, which I think is we win, you lose. So I would like to know who's going to pick up the mantle of a lose agreement. Who's going to be on the other side of that equation? If the United States has to win all of the benefits and the other party has to lose, who wants a deal like that? Okay. So you can say, well, we're now going to get these amazing bilateral trade agreements. What party in their right mind would say, I want some of that, please? You already had what I think is an amazing agreement, frankly, tilted towards U.S. benefits. You walked away from that. Who would now sign on to a new agreement with the United States and count on it to get it across the finish line? I think the U.S. credibility is frankly in tatters, and I'm not sure what kind of trade bilateral agreement is going to come in its wake.
Okay, so and when you talk about negotiating, in fact, Edward Alden of the Council on Foreign Relations said this. He says that Trump has single-handedly given away an enormous source of leverage over China. The first rule of negotiating is that you don't give away something for nothing, and he's done that right off the bat. So are you saying perhaps it's that there was a better way to perhaps renegotiate TPP or to not pull out altogether? Is that what you're saying, Debra?
No, well, from my perspective, the TPP was already written by the United States, largely in U.S. interests. I think that the agreement that you have, from my perspective, already gave the United States the lion's share of benefits. Okay. For the United States now to walk out, I'm not sure what kind of replacement deal you think is going to be better.
Melinda, what are your reasons for opposing TPP?
Well, this is not a question of protectionism or trade versus no trade. What we have been opposing is a set of rules that were negotiated on behalf of not U.S. interests, but the interests of a special group of multinational corporations. We saw rules that expanded monopolies for big pharmaceutical companies at the expense of patients to raise the prices of medicines around the globe, to block generic competition. We saw rules that benefited Wall Street that restricted the ability for governments to regulate against another financial crisis, and to give Wall Street and other multinational banks special powers to challenge our laws and regulations outside of our courts and special tribunals before 3 corporate lawyers. We saw rules that threatened our food safety and security, that pushed an agenda that was, frankly, in benefit of the wealthiest, not broadly U.S. interests. And I think for that reason, we saw international solidarity, people power that fought for years to delay the ends of these negotiations and ultimately derailed it. This was an agreement. It's unfortunate. This isn't about leadership in the region or not. It's about what rules do we want to be trading under? Do we want to be benefiting one section of special corporate interests, or do we want the benefits to be shared broadly? And I think the U.S. public rejected. We have to be clear. This is not Donald Trump. This was Democrats, Republicans were opposing this. And that is why it did not achieve a majority in Congress.
Deborah, I was watching your face as Melinda was speaking, and you seem very skeptical of this, but there are a lot of people that share the same criticisms that Melinda outlined, that say that these deals only favor big corporations, that they are really not about jobs and people. And in fact, often the promises that are made about these agreements sometimes don't come to fruition. They don't necessarily trickle down to the workers, even if the companies tend to do better.
No, see, I disagree. I think if you actually read the agreement and if you understood what the agreement does, from my perspective, the best part of this agreement is actually what it does for small companies, for example. Small companies need an agreement like the TPP in order to compete because it makes it easier for small companies. And I'm talking about tiny companies, five individuals operating out of their living room, for heaven's sakes, to be able to access markets that are growing and that are developing. Those are the kinds of companies where jobs are born and where jobs get created. Those are the kinds of companies that can use an agreement like the TPP to attach itself to larger growing markets across the region. This is not about writing rules. This is not about food safety standards being undermined. Food safety standards, in fact, first of all, they're fairly light in the TPP. And of the rules for food and food safety, I would argue the reverse. I would say that to the extent that we had food safety standards in the TPP, they were precisely in the direction you would like them to go, which is to say you have to have rules in the TPP that are based on science. You cannot just make up a rule that says you can no longer allow food products to come in because I don't feel like allowing them in on a Tuesday, which is what we see across Asia on a regular basis. TPP prohibits that kind of behavior, and that's precisely the direction that I think most consumers of food would like their governments to go
Deborah,
in.
I'm going to stop you for a moment because I do want Melinda to have a chance to respond to that, and then Gordon, I would like you to as well. But Melinda first.
Well, I heartily disagree with that analysis and have read the TPP chapters as well. We unfortunately had to rely on leaks for years because it was negotiated in secret. But then when the text was made public, when the negotiations were concluded, we saw the rules that were worse than we thought. And in terms of the argument about promoting small business, of course, they are the job creators. The vast majority of them are not looking for the exports. We know that small businesses are develop in our domestic economies, and that has been a red herring that has been pushed out. We know that it's been large corporations that have pushed the rules of the TPP, and unfortunately, this is not something that was a left or right rejection. This was a rejection of a set of rules that that benefited a certain section, as I mentioned, that raise medicine prices, that restrict financial regulation, make it more difficult for us to legislate in the public interest. And we need a different model. We need a model that puts people first, that opens up the negotiation process. It very much remains to be seen whether that is something that we can count on for the future. But we will continue to fight for that.
Gordon, do you agree with some of Melinda's critiques of TPP?
Yeah, I don't understand what people first is. You know, there are broad critiques of trade in general. And I think that there is an issue, you know, between globalization in general and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And it's sort of hard to separate the two. But if you look at the specific provisions of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I think they go a long way towards answering that general critique. And the TPP terms are probably a lot better than we see in most multinational trade agreements. And they certainly are better than China's alternative, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So it's not like there's going to be trade or no trade. It's going to be TPP or RCEP. And so, therefore, I think TPP, you know, the U.S. should have stayed behind it.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to explain what I mean by people first. Let me just explain what I mean by people first. The TPP was negotiated with a trade advisory committees that were 500 corporate advisors. There was only a small handful of public interest, labor, environmental advisors. This is 9 in 10 of the advisors specifically represented big multinational corporations or their trade associations, while the public and the press were locked out for years. And when that is the process, you come up with a set of rules that benefits a very small section of the public, and that's why people in the United States and in all the TPP countries were very concerned from the beginning.
Okay, let's keep talking about these trade agreements, because obviously TPP is the one that's getting a lot of attention, but there's NAFTA, obviously, there's TTIP. In fact, Donald Trump's withdrawal from the TPP has some Europeans concerned that he will also scrap the TTIP. Now, that's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership that was negotiated last year. Then, of course, there's always the North American Free Trade Agreement, that's NAFTA, with Canada and Mexico. Now, Trump has promised to renegotiate what he calls the worst trade deal ever, talking about NAFTA. He has threatened to tax companies that plan to build factories in Mexico and export to the U.S. Canadian officials are meeting with Trump's economic advisor this week. He says Canada would benefit from a new NAFTA, but there are concerns the renegotiation can end up hurting Mexico's economy. And I want to go to you, Debra, about this, because you say that it's not going to be that easy to negotiate a deal that President Trump would actually be happy with based on some of the things he said. Am I hearing you right? Am I paraphrasing you correctly?
No, I think that's true. I think it's going to be very difficult in any agreement larger than 2. I think he will be dissatisfied because his view of a negotiation is I win, you lose. If you have more than 2 parties, it's impossible for him to argue that he won more than everyone else. So I think NAFTA is headed for real problems because it's a 3-party negotiation, and he'll be delighted if it drops to a 2-party negotiation and they drop out, frankly. I think it would not make him too terribly sad if NAFTA the parties just walked away, or if he just tore the whole thing up altogether.
Gordon, do you agree with that?
And I would say, if I could just
Debra,
finish up on the TPP, I would say that we now, frankly, from the perspective of people who were opposed to the TPP, you got your wish. You now have the United States out of the TPP, and frankly, we'll see whether you were right or not. I think you were wrong, and I think you're about to find out whether, in fact, having no TPP benefits the people that you think will be benefited. And I think at the end of the day, those folks that you think you wanted to put first are actually going to be harmed by this decision. But now you've gotten what you wanted, you don't have the TPP in the United States.
So let me ask this then. Are you saying, you're saying that they're going to find out that this was wrong? How would that be reflected? Would that be reflected in higher prices? And if so, do you think that will make some people regret this? Debra, I'm sorry.
I assume we're going to find a fair amount of buyer's remorse, frankly. You're going to find a lot of people who will say, I thought we were supposed to have more jobs. I thought we were supposed to have better benefits at the end of this. And when we discover that, in fact, turning inward does not result in more jobs and lower prices, people will say, wait a second, what happened? I thought we were putting America first. We were putting more jobs, more wages, and we didn't get that. I think people will say, wait a second, what happened?
Melinda, do you think
it can't all be put at the feet of the collapse of the TPP, but I think that's what the ultimate reaction will be.
Melinda, do you think that globalization that has been on course for a few decades now, do you think that it is inherently flawed, just as a concept?
No, globalization and trade are not inherently flawed concepts. That's what I've been trying to say. The TPP pushes a model that has benefited large multinational corporations because they're negotiated in secret with those corporate interests at the center. You can have a different model of globalization, and that is what we've been pushing for years. I think with ending the TPP is ultimately a good thing. It would have expanded a very damaging model, but it is symbolic. It was already dead. It did not have support. So now the real question is, are we going to have a different model? That remains to be seen. Certainly, we are very skeptical that many of the cabinet members in this administration were supportive of TPP, are multinational corporations, billionaires themselves. we need to see a different model that, as I said before, that will take out the special corporate privileges that allow corporations to sue before our government, before secret panels of 3 corporate lawyers. For our environmental laws and public health laws, we need to take out these rules that expand monopolies at the expense of patients, access to medicines, et cetera. And so in terms of the NAFTA question, again, civil society in Mexico, Canada, and the United States have been clear for decades that NAFTA needs to be replaced. Now, this is not about, for us, about pitting workers in the United States versus workers in other countries,
Melinda,
or the U.S. versus the rest of the
Melinda,
world. We need a different model that
I want to stop for just a moment just so I can get Gordon in on this. Gordon, do you think that because of what's happened with TTP that agreements like NAFTA are in danger?
Yeah, NAFTA is in danger, and one way you could look at the TPP withdrawal is basically it was sending a message to Mexico City that we are willing to junk large trade agreements if you're not willing to renegotiate the terms of NAFTA. One other thing about all of this, and that is Trump has promised to reduce taxes and reduce regulation. And that probably will trigger economic growth in the United States. We could see 4.5% growth. That will make the U.S. market more alluring. That will make it actually a bilateral deal with other countries actually feasible because people will want into the U.S. market.
So are you saying that fears of a trade war are overblown?
Yeah, I think that they are overblown. If Trump can actually re-engineer the U.S. economy, we are going to find perhaps a new era of trade because countries will want into the U.S. market. That's what made TPP so important for countries in the first place. I think Trump is actually going to, in a sense, set the groundwork for perhaps a second term or maybe another president who will go back to renegotiate large trade agreements.
You're talking about a second Trump term?
I said if there were a second Trump term or a successor, it will lay the groundwork for big deals because they will become feasible again.
Debra, do you agree with that?
No, we are headed for a trade war, I think, in very short order, particularly as the Trump team rolls out a number of strong enforcement actions, especially aimed at China. The assumption seems to be by Trump and his top advisors that when the United States pushes unfair trade policies or policies by the Chinese that are unfair against China, that the Chinese will simply respond by unilaterally disarming and will do what the United States wants when confronted by a strong U.S. And I think this is a very inaccurate way of viewing the response by the Chinese. The Chinese will not respond in that way, particularly not in this year, when we have a very important party Congress at the end of the year. The Chinese will respond in kind. And when they do, the Trump administration will ratchet up their response, and we will end up inevitably moving towards something that we have not seen in decades, which is a tit-for-tat trade war, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time. And we haven't seen one in an era when we are all hooked together in supply chains. It will be incredibly damaging.
And who loses?
And I'm not sure how you pull that brakes back in. We all lose here in Asia. Anyone who is economically linked together, export-oriented, we will all lose from that kind of environment.
Okay, that will have to be the final word. And thank you to all of you for this conversation. Melinda St. Louis, Debra Elms, and Gordon Chang. Thank you all. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime if you visit our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Rochelle Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.